hello, everybody. And I would say welcome, and I would say it's a great pleasure to be here, but I kind of can't welcome you to anywhere, and I'm in the same place that I've been for the last 2 weeks, which, depending how you look at it, means I am either here in the internet where everything is online and digital and amazing, and I'm literally living in the code, or I'm here in my study at home, standing in front of a webcam, surrounded by some lights that I bought on Amazon, talking to technology, because this is how all of us are going to be living from now on. Now, it's been a really, really weird couple of weeks. 3 weeks ago today, 5th of March, I was in Denmark. I was in Warpig's Bar in Copenhagen. We'd just done a conference on a cruise ship, the Go To Copenhagen conference. There was a whole bunch of people there from all over Europe. We were out, you know, partying and celebrating and having fun. And you know, different people have responded to what's been going on, different companies, different countries, but I don't think anybody would have predicted, if you'd gone around that table of people 3 weeks ago and said 3 weeks from now, 21 days, most of Western Europe will be on lockdown and the police will be making sure people don't go outside. I don't think anyone would have believed it. You know, this whole thing has been so quick and so unprecedented in the way that it's changed everybody's lives and stuff. And, you know, I'm not for 1 second going to diminish the efforts of, you know, I know there are people who have been very seriously affected by this. I know there are healthcare workers and, you know, hospitals and things all over the world who are working really, really hard to study it, to understand it, to contain, eventually to resolve it. I salute what they're doing. I hope all of you join me in doing that, and we'll be opening windows at 8 o'clock and shouting and playing instruments in the street, which is a cool thing people have started doing while we're all in lockdown. But for a lot of us, you know, this is just kind of weird. It's like, you know, if you haven't been directly affected by this, what's basically happened is you've been told you've got to stay at home, you're not allowed to go outside, that's it, everything is online, all the conferences and the meetups and everything are canceled or they're postponed until further notice. And so we're stuck at home with broadband and Netflix and YouTube, and food deliveries are still working in most places. And there's this kind of weird little bit of me going, if you went to me when I was 16 years old and you said, look, this is what it's like in the future. Jogging is illegal and you have to stay at home and play on the internet all day, I'd have been like, that doesn't sound so bad. Because like I'm sure some of you, there's a bit of me that's kind of prepared for this because of these books. This is Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson and Neuromancer by William Gibson. Does anyone have, all of you, I'm guessing many of you have read at least one of these. Do a quick kind of raise your hand if you are familiar with these great prophetic works of fiction. Because this is where the whole kind of idea of cyberpunk stuff came from, you know, these sort of punk computer hackers in the future. But also in both of these books, they introduce the idea of a sort of digital virtual reality, a parallel kind of world to the real physical reality, where people do stuff, where people have meetings and they communicate and they go to work and they socialize and they interact with each other. And, you know, Neil Stephenson's book, it was called The Metaverse, and it had, you know, bars and motorcycle races and all these kind of interesting things that seemed incredibly cool and ahead of their time, and are almost sort of starting to come through. I know a couple of people who are in lockdown and they got HoloLens headsets and they're figuring out how to do like 3D interactive virtual reality socializing online. And, you know, William Gibson had this sort of similar idea, and in his, unfortunately, he called it The Matrix, and then The Matrix movie came out, and now we can't call it that anymore because nobody has any idea what we're talking about. But we are suddenly, and in a hurry, we are trying to figure out how to do all kinds of things online, virtually and digitally in a very, very short space of time. And the thing which is making it really, really difficult is if you're having a problem getting on a Zoom call or something, I can't come over and help you. Nobody can come over and help you. We're having to bootstrap this whole thing remotely. So, you know, if you're having a problem connecting to something, the only tools we've got to help each other figure this out are the same tools that we're having trouble with, because those are the tools that aren't working properly. So what can we do about it? Well, first of all, you know, it's kind of weird. When Neringer and Lara said, do you want to speak at our meetup? I was like, yeah, I can probably do a thing about what it's like to go online and what it's like to run online communities. And, you know, how am I qualified to do that? Who am I and why am I standing in front of you? Well, the answer is I have nearly 3 weeks experience in running online communities, which at this point is about 50% more than anybody else. And so as long as I keep ahead of the curve, I guess that makes me some kind of expert on this. Like I said, 3 weeks ago, I was at a physical conference. I was at Go to Oslo, which was happening on a ship sailing between Oslo and Copenhagen. I got back on the Sunday night. And then that week, there was a meetup I was supposed to go to on Wednesday night, which was run by this group, the London Women in Agile group, which is a really, really cool, London-based group for women working in Agile, women and allies, which is well, how I go, working in Agile software development and stuff. And the day before, they said, we decided this is going to be a virtual meetup. We're not going to do it in person. We're going to do it online. Now, I'd never been to a virtual meetup up to this point. I had visions of this being like, the conference call from hell, where somebody's talking and you can't hear them and you can't see them, but they get paid more than you. So you just sort of shut up and keep them open on a window, and you're like, maybe, and you poke your phone and you don't really pay attention. And then someone's dishwasher comes in on the call. But this was a real revelation for me for 2 reasons. One, it's the first time I'd ever really seen Zoom, which is the platform that we're using to run this meetup tonight. First time I'd really seen Zoom used properly by people who knew what they were doing with it. And the second thing, which was a real stroke of luck, the speaker at that Women in Agile meetup was this lady, JUDY REES. And JUDY is an expert at remote collaboration. She was originally scheduled to talk in person to a room full of people about how to do stuff like have difficult conversations and staff appraisals, even things like disciplinary hearings and stuff for fully remote teams where getting together and talking in person is not an option. But because this kind of whole situation unfolded in the few days ahead of it, it ended up being almost like a masterclass in how to take real life interaction and move it online. So partly she was, speaking with a really, really interesting insight and experience about the kind of problems teams have running these kinds of things. Partly it was a masterclass in how to use the Zoom platform from somebody who uses it a lot and knows how it works and is very, very good at it. So we learned all kinds of things. We saw breakout rooms, and we saw being able to organize people into subgroups, and we saw screen sharing and remote control and all these kinds of capabilities. And I thought, this was Wednesday night, and I thought this might be useful later. I should probably start digging in a little bit to how we might run events on this platform if we have to. By Friday, almost everybody I know was told, you are working from home, we are closing the office. By the end of the following week, governments were starting to put entire countries into lockdown. You're not allowed outside. You're allowed to go jogging for 20 minutes a day. There's going to be a black market any day now in renting dogs for the places where walking your dog is one of the reasons you're allowed outside. So that's my hot stock tip right now, is get on the dog rental black market, and we can figure that out. But that Friday, literally 2 days after this, I knew so many people who were suddenly like, I'm working from home for the foreseeable future, and I have no idea how this is going to work. And so I pinged a whole bunch of people just on Twitter and some Slack workspaces I'm on. I said, look, none of us has any idea how this is going to work. Why don't we have lunch together on Zoom and see if we can figure it out? And we did. We set up a Zoom thing. I got a Zoom account. I invited, and we had about 15, 20 people just hanging out and chatting and playing around with, is that okay? Does my webcam work? I can't get my microphone working, and finding all these neat features of the Zoom platform, like the virtual background that you can see behind me right now. I don't really live in internet code space. This is completely virtual, but once you figure it out, it makes the whole thing look so much more interesting. And I thought, what the hell? All right, we did lunch on Friday, and it worked pretty well. We ran a virtual meetup on Tuesday. We got about 55 people came along to that, most of whom had never done this kind of thing before. Because what I was trying to do was to go to all the people, the speakers and experts and trainers who are out there, and be like, look, we are online now. That's it. It's you do it online or you don't do it at all. The physical events are probably not coming back for a couple of months at least. Let's create opportunities for all of us to figure out what the hell we're doing here and how it all works. And so we got 3 speakers. We got Guy Royce came on. He did 10 minutes talking about non-deterministic data structures, which was really interesting and cool. He analyzed this whole data set of the transcripts of the UFO sightings that are collected in the US. So all these people who've gone out in the countryside and think they've seen aliens or a UFO, he's doing like a sort of deep learning analysis of all this stuff and using some really interesting data structures to do it. And we learned all about it by watching him on a Zoom call. We had Stephen Horns do a thing about password storage. We had Christine Seaman do a thing about Ashtanga yoga and actually finish up by demonstrating some yoga poses for us there, like in her living room in Omaha, Nebraska. So the time zones thing is weird. We have speakers. So right now it's the middle of the afternoon for me. And after I finish talking to your evening meetup, I'm going to go and do an afternoon webinar, which I haven't quite got my head around yet, but I'm sure it'll come with time. But the really nice thing about it is when this whole thing started happening, you know, I'm fairly well known. I'm also quite loud. And I went out and I said, look, none of us is going to figure this out sat in a room by ourselves talking to a webcam. We need other people who have got the time and will jump on calls and help us figure things out. So I set up a Slack team and I said, look, anyone who wants to come in here, we'll figure this thing out. I'll share a link to that in the chat for this group if anybody wants to join it. And that's been brilliant, because we're trying out all these different platforms, Zoom, Whereby, WebEx, Hangouts. Different people have got, you know, different cameras, different bits of technology, microphones, green screens, all kinds of kit, from just stuff they found in their desk that they want to check it still works, to people who have genuinely, you know, invested in this for doing Pluralsight courses, and now they need to find out how well it works for doing live presentation. And it has made so much difference having that team of people, just like, hey, I need to test something. Can I get 10 people on a call? And you'll get 10 people on a call and you can try it out for 2 minutes. And it's fine because everyone's stuck at home, and the distraction and the human contact and, you know, just getting a chance to goof around and laugh for a bit has actually proved really, really worthwhile. So you are all welcome to join us on that if you want to. I'll share the links to that at the end, and I won't share them on the slides. I will share them in the chat. So you just have to click instead of taking a picture with your phone and then forgetting about it forever. But what I want to do, there are kind of, I mean, there's 10 tips because I broke it down into 10 tips, but these are the 10 things we've kind of learned so far from doing lots and lots of these little events and meetups, which I hope will be useful for everybody out there who's trying to figure out how to do remote working, how to run remote meetups, tips for doing remote presentations at conferences or with your teams, any of that kind of stuff. So first of all, there is no right answer. There are dozens of different tools that you can use to do remote collaboration. And often the thing that worked really well for one job isn't the same thing that will work well for another job. Now, Zoom is kind of emerging as a bit of a front runner. I know people have had really, really good results with Microsoft Teams when it's collaborating with their coworkers at a, you know, organization that's already set up. I've seen interesting and positive results from things like WebEx. I've seen platforms like Whereby, which have a sort of slightly different approach to it. But the other thing is you don't need one package or one tool. Something that is rapidly becoming apparent is it's a very powerful combination having something like a Slack workspace, which is persistent. Hello. Oh. One of the fun things about this is occasionally, it's basically the equivalent of you're doing a talk at a live conference and someone in the front row takes a phone call. And they're like, oh, hi, Mum. Yeah, I'm at a conference. Yeah, there's someone on stage talking about software. I'm sure it's not important. It's all right. How are you? And you're like, please, could you leave the room now, sir? We'll figure all this out, right? But there's no right answer. A really powerful combination is a bunch of people in something like a Slack workspace, which doesn't require your undivided attention. You can dip in and out of it. And then you use that to say, hey, we're going to have a coffee break now. Here's the link, and you can all jump in and join that chat. Or, hey, I'm going to do a talk about non-deterministic data structures. Here's the link to it. It'll be last about half an hour, and people can jump in like that. And you can use tools. There's a thing called Miro, which is an online virtual whiteboard. We can use, you know, things like Trello will work up to a point if you're just collaborating. And lots of this is stuff that distributed teams had already started to figure out, but now we're having to kind of figure it out from scratch without being able to sit in the same room and have a conversation about it. So don't be afraid to mash together combinations of different technology. Put links on Twitter if you want people to come to your meetup. Put meetup.com and link that to Slack and link the Slack to the Zoom, and just mash things together and find combinations that work for you. And maybe the combination that works today is different to the one that worked yesterday. Not everything is a meeting. A lot of the packages we're using now, Zoom, WebEx, you know, Skype, these kinds of things, they are designed, and you can understand why, they're designed to sell as a business communications tool. Now, when businesses have meetings, they invite 20 people to a room. It will start at 3 o'clock. It will finish at 4:30. There is an agenda, and then everybody leaves. Now, I know that that's not really how meetings actually happen in real life, but that's the kind of perfect utopian meeting that they are trying to translate into a digital online format. Now, when I go out on a Thursday night for drinks with friends and stuff, that's not how that works. We have had a couple of social things on Zoom as well, where we take all the people who we'd normally say, hey, who's coming out for beers on Thursday? And we've invited all of them to the same Zoom chat. And the platform copes with it, but it's basically in a brightly lit room with 28 of your friends all talking at the same time. And a lot of these kind of little serendipitous things you get, for friends or you get for dinner, whatever, it's easy to just kind of, sit down with someone in the corner who you haven't seen for a while and the two of you have a chat for 15 minutes. Or, you're having a party in your house for your birthday and you can go to the kitchen and get a beer out of the fridge and see who's in there. We haven't figured out yet how these kinds of interactions translate into running online events. We know how to do the bit of a conference where you will sit and watch someone talk about microservices. We haven't figured out how to do the bit where a bunch of you go around the corner and get a cheeseburger at lunchtime, or where you meet up over coffee in the hotel before you head down and you talk about what you're going to see that day. We're figuring it out fast, but we're not quite there yet. You don't need expensive gear. You can buy expensive gear. I mean, the sky is the limit when it comes to some of this stuff, especially since all the cheap gear on Amazon has sold out. But you don't need to go out and buy lots of expensive new equipment to be able to do video conferencing and working remotely, but do learn how to get the best results out of the stuff you already have. So the golden rule here, laptop microphones are horrible. All laptop microphones in history of every piece of technology ever made are horrible. They are far away from your mouth. They are right next to your hands. They are inside something you are literally banging on with your fingers while you type. Even the best microphone in the world is not going to work when you do that. But you probably have a drawer in your house where you have the earbuds that came with your phone, and they have a microphone on the cord. So use those, because that gets the mic up here next to your mouth. If you have an external webcam, plug that in and use that, because most of them have an external microphone as well. Gives you a much better quality of pickup. And don't be afraid to jump on calls with friends, or just, phone someone and go, hey, does this sound okay? I'm just trying to figure it out before I join this important meeting, whether this sounds okay or not. In terms of cameras and stuff, most webcams are actually pretty good for this kind of thing. The thing that I see a lot of people sort of struggling with, and I can see some of you on this call may find this advice useful, is that lighting makes a huge difference. Now, you can have a top-end system where you've got dedicated professional lights, but really, the most important thing is you want light shining onto your face from the front, and you don't want light shining onto the back of your head from behind. If you're sat in front of a window and you're in your living room and the window behind you, it's daylight outside and the sun is shining and everything, you're just going to show up as a kind of dark shadow because all the light is coming behind you and your camera will compensate for that. So if you can put a desk lamp on and close the curtain behind you, you're just going to look a lot better on the camera signal that comes through. It's going to feel more like a natural conversation for the other people who are on the call. Play around with things. Ask people what works. See what looks. Just take photographs and compare before and after, and experiment. Figure it out. For running events like this, it makes a massive difference if you can have two people, what we started calling a producer and a presenter. So the way that we're running the session here tonight, Laura from Build Stuff is our producer. So she's the one who sat there looking at this grid of people and going, mute that person, unmute that person, share that screen, switch that person off. Now that's difficult. That's basically like as every bit as intense as standing and delivering the presentation. But it means one person is concentrating on the mechanics of how the meeting is happening, and the other person is concentrating on the audience and the content and interacting and engaging with people. If you're trying to do the whole thing yourself, every time there's a problem with the call, you will lose me while I go and click buttons on my laptop for 2 or 3 minutes, and then you'll start looking at your phone, and then you'll be like, oh, is he talking again? And it makes the flow of the thing much more difficult to sustain. There has been, I don't know if anyone remembers, but in July last year, there was this big thing about Zoom. The Zoom desktop client was, there was a vulnerability in it which would allow an attacker to switch on your webcam remotely. And it was quite unprecedented because Apple made the unprecedented step of actually issuing a macOS update that locked out this vulnerability because they didn't think that Zoom had responded to it quickly enough. Now, At the time, that was kind of interesting. I don't know, I uninstalled Zoom in response to that, but I kind of wasn't really using it anyway. And there are various things, you know, there's Google Hangouts has Google's data acquisition policies behind it. Zoom has its own privacy policies and stuff. But there are people out there right now who are relying on tools like Zoom and Hangouts to maintain friendships, to talk to their families, to support people who are isolating because they've developed symptoms, to try and get their businesses through this thing and out the other side. Do not be that jerk who pops up and goes, oh, you should uninstall Zoom because it's basically malware, guy. No, now is not the time. This is the digital equivalent of eat cheeseburgers or starve to death. We do not want to hear about cholesterol. We are trying to get through this thing and figure out how to make it work. Thank you for your interest in information security. We will be back when things are back to normal and we can continue those conversations. But right now, we're just trying to find stuff that works. It's not about privacy. It's not about data. It's about human conversations and being able to see someone's face and chat to them and feel like we're not all stuck indoors for the rest of the summer. Maintain boundaries if you can. There was a time, a long, long time ago, about 2 weeks, where you would go to an office, and the office was a professional place, and you would wear smart clothes, and you would drink coffee, and you would be productive. And then you would leave, and your brain would change gear. There would be a context shift. You would go to a bar, and in the bar, you would drink wine or beer, and you would talk to your friends, and you would tell jokes. And then you would go home where you could sit around in a bathrobe and watch TV. And now all of those boundaries are gone. We don't have those different spaces to give us the subconscious cue around who am I talking to? What's the purpose of this conversation? What time of day it is? Should I be drinking at 10 o'clock in the morning? I don't know. The other person on this call, it's already evening for them. And this, you know, I was on a call the other night where there were a couple of people who were clearly still at work and they were just kind of alt-tabbing in and out of the window and chatting. And there were a couple of other people who were sat on the sofa and clearly in very, very high spirits and enjoying themselves. And there's a couple of people who are kind of got it on their phone while they're putting the kids to bed and this kind of stuff, which is kind of cool, but at the same time, sooner or later, somebody is going to accidentally connect to a work call with something on the wall behind them that they probably didn't want their boss to know they have in their study at home and stuff. So let's just try and think a little bit. How do we maintain those boundaries that we used to get from physical space? Something weird I've started doing, this room I'm in right now is upstairs in my house. This is where I work. I have all my equipment here. When I'm finished work for the night, I lock the door from the outside. I take the key downstairs and I put it next to the kettle. And then when I get up in the morning, I have to go downstairs and I have to be where the coffee is, even if just to get the key and come back up. And that way I don't end up, you know, sat at a desk in my bathrobe and going, oh, well, it's 11 o'clock now. Maybe I shouldn't bother getting dressed. It's little tiny details like that will make a kind of big help in all of this. Talk to people as often as you can. We're all stuck indoors. Some of us are, you know, in quarantine with families. Some of us are in quarantine on our own. A lot of this stuff is easier if you just ping someone and go, hey, you got 5 minutes for a quick chat? I've got a problem with a piece of code I'm writing. I want to try out my new webcam. I'm kind of bored. I just found this cool piece of music that I think you might enjoy. You know, a lot of those serendipitous, the stuff that you used to mention to somebody when you were getting a cup of coffee or, you know, going for a drink after work, we're not doing those things with those people anymore. So don't be afraid to ping them. They'll be all right. They're home and they're probably bored and really glad of the attention. And we have all these channels now that we can use to talk to each other. Let's explore some new ways to collaborate. How many of you, give me a little show of hands, how many of you have seen Visual Studio Live Share? Visual Studio Live Share is multiplayer text editor. You can go into Visual Studio, it's a free plugin, and you can set up a session and you can invite people to it using a link. And then what you get is you get, I think it's up to 5 now, 5 people editing the same file at the same time with different colored cursors, and it has a voice chat plugin that goes along with it. So if you're used to mob programming or you're running workshops or training or something where you'd have a couple of people sat around one laptop looking at some code, you can get all those people in the same code now. And you can sort of coordinate it like, okay, go down a couple of lines. Yes, you see that line of code there? That's where you need to make the change. And people can make suggestions. You can drop comments in. You can do some really cool stuff using screen sharing and remote control as a way of pair programming remotely. There's a lot of teams who are figuring this out already because they're fully distributed. Now that's all of us. Everyone is suddenly a distributed asynchronous team, whether we were planning to do it or not. But there are some really, really smart tools out there. Something to try if you need to, you know, remember you can still pick up the phone. If somebody is kind of, you think maybe they're getting overwhelmed because they've got 9 Slack workspaces and they got Telegram and they got Signal and they got WhatsApp and they've got email and they got this, hey, add to the noise. But if you pick the phone up, you can call them and you can be like, hey, you okay? I noticed you kind of, went quiet, or if you call someone, hey, I'm really struggling with something. And particularly if we're running an event like this one, and you're like, we were supposed to have a speaker connected by now, get their phone number and ring them and be like, hey, we're expecting you online. Your talk starts in 10 minutes. We haven't seen you yet. Is everything okay? And maybe you'll just wake them up and they'll be like, I was watching Family Guy and I fell asleep on my couch because I don't even know what day it is anymore. Or maybe they'll be like, yeah, actually, I'm having a problem with my internet. Can you stall? I'll be on as soon as I can. But having that kind of second back channel of phone calls just means if your broadband dies, you're not cut off from the whole rest of the world. It seems weird that I'm recommending telephone calls. That's how much the world has changed. And finally, bring your pets to meetings. Just do it. The best thing about lockdown is when you're in your daily stand-up in the morning and one of your colleagues is there with a dog and another one's there and the cat joins in on the morning stand-up. And I was on a chat the other day where someone brought their gecko. The single best thing about the entire lockdown thing so far is that bringing pets into business meetings has become socially acceptable. The New York Times published an article going, don't do that. And then they pulled the article because the backlash from the internet was so overwhelming. Bring pets to meetings. Pets are awesome. It brightens up people's day. It'll help all of us get through this. And, the last thing that I want to say is, remember, be kind. This is all really weird and scary. You have no idea. The person on the other end of the Slack channel or the other end of the webcam, you have no idea what's going on just out of shot. You don't know what going on with friends, family. You don't know what they're going through. This is weird and scary, but it will be okay. We'll get through this. Welcome to the internet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dylan, for your amazing talk and bringing some life into this very mundane way of working and reminding us that we're all humans first and then we're technologists. So thank you for this. And thank you, Niringa and Laura, for this amazing opportunity. Once again, so just to touch on what Dylan said, I find these remote meetings and meetups a bit weird, again, because you can't hear anybody around you other than maybe the sound of the clock in your room or the refrigerator or the washing machine. But yeah, I wanted to turn this around a little bit and talk a little bit about software quality and how I'm trying to keep up with it remotely. So a little bit about myself. I work in a fintech called Thought Machine in London. I'm their head of quality and I've been in the company for about 7-8 months almost now. And I'll talk a little bit about how I got the whole baking quality into the process regime going. So what I'll do is how I want to talk a little bit about how you can get started on improving quality, what type of metrics you can use to assess quality. And then once you start sharing those metrics, how can you try and make sure that it's still in front of people's minds as they're delivering software, even when working from home. Every time I've been hired for a QA role, whether it was a hands-on QA or managing a team, I've been brought in and asked to come and fix quality. Or something else that my hiring manager has said is that our clients are really unhappy, our releases are delayed, we're finding too many issues in production, or we never deliver all the features we agree to deliver, and so on. And it varies from product-based companies or companies which have e-commerce style solutions. The other thing which people also talk about is that there's a lot of stress in engineering teams in general. There's always this, I feel this agile methodology has created this unsaid expectation of taking estimates away as something which is definite. So if we say we're going to deliver 10 stories, they expect us to deliver all 10 of them rather than, okay, it was an estimate, we can deliver 5. And that actually creates a lot of stress in the teams. And then they rush through code reviews, and that's how bugs escape into production. And that also is a quality problem. So how do you create an action plan when you're brought in to fix something like quality, because quality is not quantitative? I got my inspiration a lot from this book called Leading Quality by Ronald Cummings John and Awais Spear. Awais has actually tweeted that during this time of lockdown, please look him up if you're interested in reading the book. He's happy to share the PDF with anybody, and I would recommend all technologists to get their hands on it. It's a very easy read, and it really helps you understand what are the things you can do to improve things like test automation and quality in your organization. So what do you do first? The first thing you want to do is create a vision statement as to where is it that you want to head when it comes to improving quality. And then you want to identify the stakeholders, which are the people who will actually tell you what are the issues and how it will help you to achieve your goal. Then you want to understand what areas the issues have been in, and then you want to define some metrics on this. So when I came to Thought Machine, the first thing I did was my role didn't exist in the company before. And there were some testers in the company, but clearly there was a need for quality. Just a little bit more about Thought Machine. It's a mid-level startup. We've been around for almost 6 years. And with startups, as some of you may know, that in the beginning, it's all about delivering and creating a product as quickly and as quickly as we can, not efficiently. There are stories of people who are actually changing code as you're demoing to your prospective client and so on, just to make sure that you get the right clients in. And when you do that, you have this thing which comes in called tech debt, or it gets really hard to build on some quickly put together software. So how do you recover from a problem like that? And that's where quality assurance comes in. So the first thing I did was come up with a vision and try to understand what is it that we need to fix. And this is our vision statement for quality. Assuring quality enables teams to drive for customer satisfaction at a sustainable pace. So over here, if you look at this closely, it talks about two big aspects. One is quality of our delivery, which is where the customer satisfaction comes in. And the second thing is you also want quality on engineering practices. How do you actually write code? How do you deliver it? How do you do code reviews? What are good tests? How do you write acceptance criteria and so on? And you want to make sure that everything you put in place, it's actually something which can scale. So if it works for, say, 3 engineering teams, will it scale for 100 engineering teams and so on? How do you automate a lot of these things into your processes and so on? And are they the right processes for you as well? So once this is done, you want to try and identify the stakeholders. This is where I ended up in 1 million meetings every week, which is for me to try and understand, okay, where are the issues? Key stakeholders for something like this are usually people in your C-suite, the CEO and CTO, who actually see value in improving quality, and that's where you want to start. I have been in organizations before where I was brought in to fix quality, but I didn't really have the buy-in from the CEO or CTO. And when they don't try and talk about the same message that you're trying to deliver, it's really hard to make sure that all of the engineering department is thinking about improving our delivery and the quality of the product. Other stakeholders are your tech leads and your testing team. These are the people who see the pain points every single day. So for example, if code reviews are taking really long, or you're writing really bad automated tests, or there are lots of flaky tests, these are all issues around how do you improve quality and where the issues lie. Other stakeholders are your incident management and release management teams. These teams are the ones who bear the brunt of the client, meaning they are the ones who the clients complain to the most. That you promised us that we'll deliver feature XYZ and we can't see it, or it's not working as we explained it to you, and there was some breakdown somewhere, and they can get really angry, which is where we turn into hot fix or patch fix situations with the release management team. And these are the people who also want you to make sure that we put the right automation in place to make sure we can deliver quick fixes quickly. So the types of questions you want to ask your stakeholders are, how do you know that quality is bad? Is it from feedback? Is it from your engineers? How many escape defects do you see? What's your code coverage like? Do you have the right processes in place? Do you have the right type of people in your teams? Because that also impacts the quality of the code being produced by an engineering team. When I was coming up with how and what matters to understand the state of quality in an organization, I came across the DORA model, or the state of DevOps report, as people have seen. And this is a screenshot from the state of DevOps report, which was produced by the DORA project, which I'd encourage everybody to go away and read. And they talk about 4 key aspects that you want to look at for creating high performing engineering teams. One is deployment frequency. How frequently do you deploy to production? Lead time for changes, meaning how quickly you can deploy new features, how long it takes your system to be restored when there are issues found, how much downtime do you have, do you actually adhere to your SLAs, and so on. And change failure rate, meaning how often do you find that there's a degradation of service and you actually need to quickly fix these issues. So that's where my inspiration came from for the metrics I'll talk about in a bit. So areas to improve. So you first identify the vision statement, you identify the stakeholders, and then you want to figure out where are the issues for quality. And this can vary from organization to organization, but this is what I've discovered so far, I think on an average of 3-4 organizations. Number 1 is hiring. It's really hard to hire really good SDETs or quality engineers, and that's where a lot of the problems are. Then you have releases, release quality, how good are they? Test automation, do you have the right frameworks in place? Product quality and process quality. For the scope of this talk, I will talk about releases and product quality. If you want to talk about the rest of the topics, feel free to tweet to me or ping me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to go into a discussion there. So releases. People find that when I discuss this, they think it's really trivial, but it's really important to have a visibility landscape for releases, especially in a startup world where initially you're just deploying every change in the product to the customer without even having version numbers, and then trying to go into it. You want to make sure that you understand what version of the product resides with which customer and in what environment of yours is deployed to which product version. You also want to make sure that you're monitoring the number of issues being found post-release versus pre-release, meaning you want to reduce the number of defects which escape to the ones that are found in the engineering teams, because you want to see that maximum number of issues are found whilst you're writing the code or you're signing it off, rather than your customer finding it. And then you can slowly try and move towards a 0 defect policy, but that can also vary from product to product. You also want to look at how you create release notes. What's the content of the release notes? Does it list all the features which are in that Git commit, which points to your release? Does it have a list of all the known issues? It's really important to talk about the known issues, I feel, because you want to provide transparency to your customer, rather than them detecting an issue and you say, oh yeah, we knew about this anyway. It's better to actually state what issues have been found and what's the SLA for those issues when they get fixed. So this is what our release calendar looks like. You can actually see when the release was done where, and what date was our cutoff. As you can actually see here, there's a week of regression testing, which isn't actually continuous deployment. We work with banks, and banks don't really look at having a very continuous deployment kind of notion, because they're high risk. And there's a lot of compliance and mitigation which we need to look at before updating software. So what we do is we actually enforce some time that is looked at when the clients want to change the product, and then we update them accordingly. So there is that, and then we go to release. We're looking at now making sure that we reduce the number of exploratory tests to automated tests, manual tests to automated tests, because we want to do an on-demand deploy to our staging environments. So as soon as the build is green and the tests are green, we want to automatically deploy to staging. So continuous testing can happen in staging environments, and you can move to pre-prod as and when you need to. Lastly, this is another table we have in our visibility landscape, which actually shows you what version of the product is in which environment and in what date was it deployed. And these hyperlinks actually point to the actual diff. The rows, each of the row corresponds to a different client, which I can't show here for privacy reasons. But you can actually see at a glance that, say, if a customer is reporting an issue in their environment, you can say, okay, this customer, it's this environment. I immediately know what version of the code they have, and we can actually spin that up in one of our clusters and try and replicate the issue and go from there. So my inspiration for product quality has come from the State of DevOps report and the book called Accelerate, which was written by Jez Humble, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, and Gene Kim. I would recommend reading it to try and understand how to create high-performing teams and how you can measure that. I won't talk about all of the metrics here, but some which are quite interesting. The first one is MTTG, which is mean time to green. You want to see that how quickly you can go from a red build to a green build in your teams. This will actually help you also measure how quickly you'll be able to fix issues in, say, production or pre-prod environments, and what type of efficiency you have in your systems with regards to infrastructure and deployment. Another one is test coverage, which I see a lot of engineers roll their eyes on about because they're like, oh, it's another manager coming around asking us for 100% test coverage, which is not the case. Test coverage is really to understand what parts of the code are being covered. Are the high impact or high risk areas being covered by automated tests or not? And how would you know that? Test coverage, I think, is most useful when it's combined with other metrics. So for example, my plan and what I've been working on is trying to combine test coverage along with the incidents found by the clients, because you want to see that what service the incident was found in, what type of test coverage is on that incident, is on that service. If the test coverage is high, but incidents are still being found in production, it means that you've written the wrong tests. If test coverage is low and incidents are being found in production, you immediately want to try and increase the number of unit tests you write for that area and improve and thereon. The other one, which is quite interesting, is QA kickback. This one actually talks about how you can actually check the number of times a story moves from QA to development. So you always see this back and forth between testers and developers, where an engineer has finished code review and they say, right, this feature is ready for sign off, and the tester, the first thing they do is, oh, I can't even load the product with this change. And things like this can be really useful for the engineering teams to try and detect what went wrong in their process. This is something very useful for the team itself, and can help them understand if, say, the acceptance criteria wasn't there or other information which was missing, which is why this QA to dev seesaw keeps happening. I just spoke about defects found in sprint versus escape defects. Another one which is quite interesting is defects found via automation or via exploratory testing per feature. It's very useful to try and keep an eye on this metric, because what happens usually is that sometimes engineering teams spend a lot of time writing automated tests and trying to figure out how much your coverage is and how it's improving, but that automation stops finding any defects. So it just becomes a running an activity for every build. And when the team actually does some exploratory testing, that's when they really find issues. So it's good to make sure that the tests you're writing are actually good at finding defects rather than a tick box activity. There are some experiences I've had where teams actually paid a lot of emphasis on writing automated tests, but we were actually finding lots of defects via exploratory tests, and we were actually wasting time writing lots of automation, and that's okay as well, as long as you have some really smart, good out-of-the-box thinkers for your testing. This metric can be really useful and a very useful activity. Some metrics that we've had in Thought Machine which have been really useful to assess quality. The graph on the top talks about how long it used to take us from check-in to deployment in a test environment. At one point, it used to take us up to 40 minutes, which means the feedback loop was really, really slow. And this metric was measured in September last year when it went down to 5 minutes, which is great, because one of the things you want to make sure for high performing teams and efficiency, which is also part of quality, is that you want to make sure that the engineers can get fast feedback when their code is deployed. Another one which we looked at was the number of times the tests were green. We have dev, staging, and pre-prod environments. What's interesting to note here that the dev environment has lower percentage than the staging environment. So the dev environment, we use trunk-based development, and the test failing on the trunk is quite common because the code is constantly changing. All our sign-offs happen in the staging environment, so having staging green more often than dev is far more important. However, whenever we make the cut to staging, we have to make sure that all the builds and the post-merge tests in dev are also green, unless otherwise this cut to staging is not done. Now, pre-prod is really low, and a lot of people may question that as to why is it so low. So the way we work, we have a product which is actually deployed to the customer's pre-prod environments. And they do lots of configuration changes, and that's where we actually find out how the tests have been running. This is why not having our pre-prod environment test green all the time is not a priority. Staging is what is our highest priority, and as soon as an incident is found, we try and replicate that environment in our pre-prod environments and try and improve it. This graph, again, as I said, we started from an entire manual testing phase to now trying to go into automation and on-demand deployment to staging. This is a graph I created from our regression spreadsheets, which was quite nice to see that we are quite far into the journey of doing on-demand staging deployments. We used to take a week to run all the regression, and now it takes half a day to run this. If anybody actually has time to write automated tests, they know immediately which teams to help. And this can be our measure of, okay, we're ready to go to on-demand staging deployments. The last graph. So this is one which I created for defects. So the one on top shows you the defects found in the engineering teams during the sprint. The one in the middle actually shows you the number of defects found between after cutoff date for each of the releases. And the last one shows you the incidents found in production by various clients and what service were they on. The goal is to try and baseline all of these defects to the types of service. The beauty of visualizing data like this is that you actually understand what should be our common ground of measurement and how can we start improving quality. Currently, the team defects are based on the team names rather than the service, because people were not logging what service were they being found in. They were just logging what environments they were being found in. So having charted this out, it was immediately visible that, okay, we do not have a one-to-one relationship here. So how will we improve our coverage, and where will we improve our coverage? So now I've actually said to the teams, you need to iron out what services the issues are being found and go from there. The problem with metrics is that a lot of people see this as something managers want. And as a manager, I feel it's really hard to tell people that this is to help their teams improve rather than something we want to measure against them. So you need to make sure there's a lot of psychological safety, and you want to make sure that the metrics you're creating are safe and they are for the teams to improve. And how can you do that? You want to first make sure the vision statement that I came up with, I actually engaged with the entire tech leads and engineering teams to try and understand where were all the pain points, and they were involved in telling me where the problems were. Then we were also talking about, okay, this is the baseline of the metrics I will measure. Will you find them useful? And some of them said yes, some of them said no. When you chart incidents, can you make sure that you're actually showing us which client is finding what type of incident? Then another thing to mention here is that the job of the test team is not to make sure that quality, that testing is performed. It's not for them to make sure that they're writing tests. It's their job to make sure that the quality of the engineering and client teams is visible. They will help visualize, they'll become the domain experts. They're the people who actually try and help you understand where you sit. And then you should also make sure you keep reviewing the metrics that you see and measure as you go on. Now, we are in times of stress. And the stress of, oh my God, I'll have to work from home. Oh my God, I don't have the right chair. Oh my God, what if I have the virus? What people forget is that it's also seasonal flu season. I've had a couple of scares myself. I get hay fever. And I was just sneezing and coughing the other day. And I was like, oh my God, I'm already sick. When things like that cloud your mind a lot, it gets really hard to concentrate, especially I think for everybody anyway, but especially for quality engineers, because what I find is our roles become into reminding people that, oh my God, are the bills green, or is the story complete? How long will it take to be completed, and so on. So how do you overcome this issue when you're working remotely? A lot of people would like to work remotely like this. I was quite looking forward to being in an exotic country over this weekend for 2.5 weeks, but sadly that's not how it's going to go to plan. Another thing I would say is never lie down like that and use your laptop, because I did it once and my laptop just slipped and bang, it hit my nose and I had a very bad cut for quite a few weeks. So don't lie down like this at home when you're working. Make sure the quality of your posture is also really good and the ergonomics of how you're working is good as well. What are the issues we see? And I'm new to remote working. I do work from home once a week, but I do that really to try and get on top of, say, creating the dashboards I work on or the reports I generate and so on. But something, it's quite interesting. I was just in a call about remote working, and they were talking about make sure that your team has a shared identity and you have shared values as a team in order to make sure that remote working is successful. And the shared value for my team really has been to make sure that we have the same vision of ensuring quality and reminding people of the processes and so on. Now, it's easier in the office because a lot of places you have the visual displays or the screens where you see the dashboards moving, or you have your Jira boards and so on. You have your planning boards and so on. And when you don't have that when you're at home. What happens then as a result is that your bills start going red, or a lot of people actually don't want bill notifications in Slack because it becomes quite noisy, or in their inbox, and they start ignoring it. And that's how quality starts slipping. Another thing I find that is when teams are working remotely, it's really easy to slip into the blame game that, oh, it used to be your job to look at the bills, but now we don't have the screen. It doesn't mean you stop doing that part of your role. Or it's not always my job to look at the tests that are being written, or you should have reminded me to do that code review. And that's how, let's say a code review in a team on average was taking 2 days, that may easily slip into 4 days and so on. And things like that can make it really hard to keep on top of these metrics and make sure that the quality can be assessed well. So what are we trying to do? Reports. They are really important. When you start working remotely, it's really important to keep on top of all types of comms. I found myself that I've started creating a weekly quality report now for the entire company, which I wasn't doing before. It was just a quarterly email, and now they want me to do it weekly so that people can be reminded. And I did that report last week. It talked about the number of features which were delivered in the release, the number of features which slipped in the release, how many flaky tests we have, where did the test coverage fall, and so on. And I was like, nobody's going to read this email. It's another report, another thing people have to read on top of Slack messages and code reviews. But I was wrong. People actually pinged me and said, oh, you said our integration test is not being run, but we actually have those integration tests. Can you see what is wrong? And we looked into our CI server and actually checked if the same test was being called or not. Another team came around and said, oh, we actually enabled another feature flag which was missing from the report. What happened was that the feature flag was actually enabled after I took the data out from the code base. So things like that are really important, because the good thing about reports is that it's very important to highlight the key takeaways, because people have a lot more things to read when they're at home. And if you just give them 5 top bullet points of this week's email, that these are the things we've discovered, let's look at it. We actually found that a big chunk of our flaky tests actually came from one of the dead repositories, which was still being run. So somebody had actually forgotten to ignore those tests when the build was being executed, and they fixed that, which is great. Another thing, emails for processes. Any processes that you define, please make sure you follow it up in an email, you put it in a Confluence page, and you remind people about it continuously. We have Slack channels where those processes have become the description of the channel, or say, for example, the visibility landscape page we have, that's in the description of the releases channel. We have a process for how we do sign-offs, who are the people who need to be invited, and so on. Put in reminders for things like this that you have to do if you're managing teams. And if you're at the receiving end of this information, try and allocate time for when you're going to read all of this. When you're at home, I have personally found that I slipped on my routine. I used to keep my mornings free for my work and catching up on emails and actually doing things, and afternoons used to be for meetings. And since I started working from home, I immediately had this feeling that, oh my God, I have to make sure I'm available all the time, which meant I started getting meeting invites for the mornings, and then my entire calendar went out of sync. And then this week I was like, no, I need to stick to the same routine. I have to make sure that I take out lunchtime. I cannot keep working through lunch just because I'm not going out. We are actually quite good at with our socials, because what we've done is we have continuous hangout calls available. Every Friday evening, there's a big company meeting with a lot of banter. So that's still going. We have a breakfast show organized by some of the engineers twice a week, where there's a lot of teasing, and we have office dogs and so on, and we keep getting and talking to each other. So that really helps with that type of social interaction. Also, something I would recommend, especially when it comes to quality, I'm actually mid-release right now. There was no way that the release date was going to be changed despite the current climate. So my team was getting quite stressed. But what we did was we said we'll have daily catch-ups, like a coffee break, where if you can make it, you come online, and we used to have coffee, and I used to bring them all the updates from the rest of the company so that they don't have to keep on top of Slack even more than they usually do, and they can keep focusing on the metrics they have for their teams, looking at the green bills and so on, and work like that. So in the end, I would just like to say, please remember that quality is subjective. What is high quality for me as a product may not be the same thing for you or your company. These metrics can be used by most, but not everyone. Make sure that you're always getting continuous feedback. Continuous feedback is what will help you improve and iron out the pain points when it comes to efficient delivery of your software. And also be open to getting metrics which don't work for you. Like we saw in the defect one, immediately when I mapped it out, I knew this was of no use. How will the teams find it useful? Be open to that change. And I think when you're working remotely, you have to be even more open, because there will be conversations which you don't hear, which you'd usually hear when you're in the offices. A lot of companies have only remote working, and they've been quite successful. So I would recommend reading up on how they do these types of things. Make sure that the values are shared. make sure that the vision is repeated, and make sure that the quality is still met for your company. Thank you.
Thank you. So who has any questions?
Thanks for that great talk. I really like the way that you visualize defects that you, I guess, get in your issue tracker. I'm wondering if you found ever a mechanism for attributing cost to a business to any of these defects, because I believe not all defects cost the business the same.
So we were actually talking about this today. So obviously for all defects, people assign priorities. So it could be high, medium, low, whatever, but that does not always correspond to the impact of the defect. And the impact is where, so for example, for our product, some of the companies we work with, they actually take the front end of the product as well, and some just take the APIs. But in the end, we really work with the client delivery managers who work with the various clients. So for example, if we saw that the login feature in the UI wasn't working, but the API was working, let's just take that as an example. That for me, in my head as a tester, that for me would be a critical defect, but it may not be critical for a client which is just using our APIs. And if that's 90% of our clients, we will deprioritize it. In terms of the cost, in my head, it's mostly about the time it's going to take to fix it, and the value that it's going to deliver as a result to the majority of the customers. And it's also about managing customer engagement. But we don't actually put in, say, oh, it's say a large, complex, let's say t-shirt size of large for this defect. And that's why we will need more time to fix it and so on. So that's something we're trying to map separately. But again, the impact is really where we decide whether a defect needs to be fixed or not. And we take it from there. Does that help in some way?
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maryam. That was awesome. Thank you,
Thank
Lara and Narendra, for hosting. We want to try a couple of cool little things now just to get some interesting screenshots and stuff. So what I'd like you to do, we got a whole bunch of people who are on, but their cameras are switched off. If you can switch on your camera and give us a nice big smile straight into the lens of your webcam, we are going to get some screenshots of what this looks like when we've got a nice big audience of connected people on. Oh, this is cool.